Jesus Freak here. Now, I've mentioned in a couple recent videos about a few different Greek texts, Latin texts, and some people were a bit confused by what I was referring to, so I'll try to explain some of the terminology I was using. Several early Bibles around, maybe 3rd, 4th, 5th century were bound in early primitive manuscript books called codices. The singular of this is a codex. Now, you hear a lot about Sinaiticus. This is, I believe, a 4th century Greek manuscript. It was located at a monastery on Mount Athos. I believe the guy's name was Constantine von Tischendorf. And he saw them using it for tinder, I believe it was, to light a fire. He convinced them to give him the manuscript instead. That's a very poorly written manuscript. Very unevenly written. There's a lot of stuff crossed off, written in the margins. Basically, it was junk. So it makes sense that it was being found in the trash and that it was being used for tinder. Then we have Codex Vaticanus. This was in the library at the Vatican for a long time. The Vatican was, of course, very cagey about it for a long time because it was one of their most prized possessions. An old 4th century manuscript. Well, there were people who had access to it. Erasmus, when he was compiling his Greek text, was aware of it and had a friend who had access. And he actually asked his friend to check some things out in it. And eventually said, nah, I'm not using this. Here's one that I refer to on occasion. And I just looked some of this stuff up on Wikipedia, so... And if I couldn't find it there, I looked it up on Google. So this is just very quick. This is a page from Codex Alexandrinus. This is the other early one. I think it's a very early 5th century manuscript. Because the Gospels in here are of what they call the Byzantine text type. It causes a lot of trouble with the narrative that, that the Byzantine text only came later. I believe the name Alexandrian comes from the fact that it's they were looking at some particularly oddball readings. This was a manuscript that had some of them in the other books. Now, I mentioned another recently, which I don't talk about as much, called Codex Bezae, or Bezae Cantabrigiensis. So called because it used to be in the possession of Theodore Bezae, and is now in the present possession of the University of Cambridge. It is a bilingual manuscript, one side Greek, the other Latin. Now, this is a pretty infamous manuscript. I believe it's a 7th century manuscript. The Latin, I think, might be Vetus Latina, which means which is a term for Latin texts that predated the Vulgate and remained in circulation alongside the Vulgate for centuries afterward. It's possible they believe that it might have been the Gospels may have been corrupted by influence from a Latin text, which was a translation of the Diatessaron, which was basically the 4 Gospels combined into a single Gospel, and which I believe was originally written in Syriac or Aramaic, and then translated into Latin. And apparently some of these corruptions were then translated into Greek and replace the original Greek text. So you have a sort of a hybrid Greek text. What this manuscript is most infamous for is it has this extremely deviant and significantly longer copy of the Book of Acts. This is a manuscript of the Western type that's not Alexandrian, that's not Byzantine either. It's the type that's underlying the Vulgate, but it's a very divergent form of the Western type. This is also the manuscript from which they got the angry Jesus in Mark 141 in the NIV, 2011 edition. Now, I mentioned a few different Greek texts. A lot of people are going to refer to the United Bible Societies or Nestle-Aland text, which is also known as a critical text. And I've said what I said, I think it's a skeptical text, not a critical text. There are a few others in competition with it. You have the Tyndale House text. You have the Hodges-Farstad text, which the New King James Version referenced and referred to as M for majority. And then you have this very similar to Hodges and Farstad, but easier to get. I think I might still have a copy of this somewhere. Robinson-Pierpont text. Hodges-Farstad and Robinson-Pierpont both reflect the Byzantine text, which I call the Eastern text, and reflects the majority of the Greek manuscripts that we have. there was another text type before this, and over here in the corner of my room, I've got a copy of one of these. The Textus Receptus, or received text, basically, Erasmus printed his first edition in 1516, and it was the first printed Greek New Testament. It was bilingual also, Greek on one side, Latin on the other. And this went through several revisions, and you had other versions later published by Theodore Bezae, Robert Stephanus. The Elseviers had one, and this is where the name Textus Receptus comes. They had a preface where they said, and here you have the text now received by all, and Textus Receptus comes from there. Robert Stephanus II reprinted his, I believe, grandfather's text. There were other bootleg versions. Some of them had Latin translations with them. And these are the text lines that were most common in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. Before the discoveries of the 19th. Before Trigel. Before Tischendorf. Before Westcott and Hort made their first critical text, which Nestle-Aland evolved from. Now, I don't speak Greek. I can't read it. I can read Latin. And so, the Latin side of Erasmus' New Testament, as well as that of Beza's New Testament, I've seen that one, it's another bilingual one, has been a great help to me. But I have to rely on their translation. Fortunately, translating Greek to Latin is very easy. The grammar is very similar. It's just pretty much a matter of mapping the vocabulary. One, of course, issue is that back then, this still used scribal abbreviations a lot. And I had to learn those. I hope this clears up a few things that have been asked. And if there's still things anyone would like to know, I'll do my best to try to explain them. Jesus, freak out.